Hello family, welcome to Carolliving. Today on our show we are going to share something that is so dear to me, designing like the 70s. Anyone who knows me knows I have this amazing obsession about old things. I feel like the old things remind us about like the times with our grandmothers when we're growing up. They are very like they bring back memories. So I am such a collector. When I'm thinking about design or construction, I look at how do I use the old design principles to bring to life something that will serve us today, to serve me today, to serve my loved ones today. So today I'm going to say, I thought about, let me talk about designing like the 70s. Now, in the 70s, think about it. Most of our parents are born maybe I'm talking to those who are in my age group, are born like maybe in the 40s, in the 50s. So the 70s were their 20s, and that's the time they were starting families. Literally, most of us who are the 80s, it's just 10 years away from that. We were born in the season whereby they're just 10 years into their family life. So what were the common occurrences? Most of the buildings were kind of post-colonial, just in our country particularly, or in African countries. It was just post-colonial, so most of the influences are so much the western side. However, it's like the vintage western side. So we used to use very basic materials, honestly. Back then it was just concrete. You would find buildings that are just concrete surfaces that are not painted, they are just glazed. Of course, many times when you look at concrete buildings, you're thinking what's happened to this? Why haven't they ever painted? I know one of the buildings that are remarkable for you who are engineers is the technology building at Makerere University. It is like it just has that concrete color. That's kind of the buildings we talk about. They were just concrete color. The floors were just cement. Even today we have cement. But you know how you keep saying that, the cement of back then, the floors were smooth, they were polishable. Like we grew up in these houses, but the cement floors were so different. Yes. The cement floors were amazing. They were a finished product, so they would always lay them, but also kind of polish them. The way they do terrazzo, like they would polish them and smooth them and constantly apply like some kind of polish, and they are constantly like smooth, but also very aesthetically pleasing and very easy on the feet. Yeah, so the floors were always cement floors. Even up to now, you can bring back that to life, but you have to have the expertise of those who know how to do it. I know many times we just do our local floors and the cement, and you're like, oh my God, that house is local. But actually, cement floors can be brought to life if you really use technology. If you do the polishing, normally it's machine work. So please always hire us, the experts, to help you bring to life designing like the 70s. Now let's talk about the walls. The walls were basic. Of course, they were painted as well, but the paints back then were not as elaborate as now. The colors were so moody. Think about the house you lived in, maybe for your grandma or for your parents. They were just like this color you'd have of paint, and it would take forever. 10 years, you still have the same coat, and it seemed okay. There were two categories. There were those that were glossy. Most of them were glossy, shiny, but also glossy, and just like dull, like matte glossy. And they would be on these walls, and they were very moody, like they were earthy toned, like browns, grays, greens, like very earthy tones. If you remember our video of the mid-century modern that I've linked below, you notice that I brought about those period pieces of design whereby they are specific to that period in time. Now, when you look at the ceilings, they were very easy. Most of them, the ceilings. We didn't have the ngarama and the concrete kind of ceiling. So they were majorly boards and varied designs of boards. Like they were varied. Some were smooth, others were chipping. But they were chemically, they have been chemically formed, so they would still be very long lasting. Others had like little crafty finishes on them. They were boards. When you think about the doors, they were completely wooden, and I just like the artistic features. The doors were not very complicated, but they were artistic. They were crafted by hands. Do you understand me? Most of the wooden pieces were crafted by hands. Even the buildings, they had minimum machinery. So most of those were actually brought up by people doing the artisanry. So they were crafted by the hands. You'd find so many carvings, so many, like lots of silhouettes, lots of geometric design on the doors. Sometimes I go in very old places, and I swear my obsession is just look at their doors, their furniture, maybe their reception. When you look at most of like those old hotels, not to mention some, but you'll find that they have this kind of epic designing like the 70s. Now, when you look at the interior decor, it had these cool colors. Like you find
we would have bed sheets that were like linen, very comfy, but linen, like they had texture to them. Remember those blankets which were like a bit of fur like? They were like fur like, but not like the one of now, which are so fine, like they are more, like say, the faux fur, right? Back then they were like fur, like heavy. They were so hard to wash. I can tell you, they were never washable. They were either for a dry clean version or just, you know, keep putting it outside to dry. You remember those blankets? They were not easily washable, but they were just like so textured and so, like, they would speak the language. This is the 70s. We had them, and some of us still have them in our homes. And you can bring to life that in this day and age, you can bring that life by bringing all the texture. You don't, it may not be necessarily as exact as the period piece, but sometimes you go down to the repurposed spaces and you'll find this. You notice that in my design style, and just as I've shared my kitchen before, behind me, you realize that I have pieces that you're thinking, okay, how did you get this piece? I am such a shopper of all things. Like, I'll go find one or two things, I collect these pieces, because for me, I feel like the 70s remind us that they were collected pieces. People used to ensure they held onto their things. They would buy a saucepan, it takes forever. They buy a jug, it takes forever. A dish, it was everything. Whether it was a chair, it took for a very long time. Not like now, you buy today and 2 years later you're throwing it away and you're replacing it. There was a lot of enhancing what you had. There was a lot of holding on to. Sometimes you'd come off like a hoarder, but they preserved more than they threw away. Most of the colors, even the tiles that were there, like fine for tile finishes, whether it was in the bathroom, the kitchen, there were also moody colors, a lot of color, a lot of, like, when you think about the houses, they were very moody, but they were always reminiscent to nature. They used a lot of nature feeling colors, like there were earthy tones, the browns, the blues, the grays, the navy blues. There were just a lot of earthy tones and a little bit of texture. The checker boxes, you remember those matches were just checker boxes? They're still here. If you're like me, who goes around looking in the different estates around the world that are old, like I can sometimes go watch the chateaus in France, or the buildings that are aristocratic buildings, maybe in the UK. On the YouTube, on YouTube you can find them. You find that most of the textured material, the floral materials, like we have those now, but they still don't have that ethic. They were old, and it felt like the attention to detail was serious. And definitely designing, when it was a structure of the house, we had a lot of nature in our spaces. Back then, people used to bring in a lot of greenery in there. We had elaborate gardens. Right now, you go and you find people have just cleared all the like pavers. You go to an apartment and it's paved surfaces everywhere. The 70s, the nature was still here. So most of the homes or the properties back then definitely had a feel of nature. You find that people had their grass lawns still intact. They had lots of florals in the pot still intact. They had flowers in their houses. It's still here, but right now it's intentional. People are not so, like, they're not so pro it all the time, but they had a lot of greenery that coming through. Sometimes there was gliding windows. I remember I grew up in this house. I remember my dad and my mom were teachers at a particular missionary school, and I grew up in this house, and I remember we had a gliding glass door in the sitting room. It was like 6 meters. Like, from one end, it was taking the entire silhouette of that side, but it was like on the back end of that living room, and outside were trees and an expansive compound. And I remember I was like, maybe I love these things because I grew up with them, but it was like such night. You would open those curtains and you feel like part of that greenery is in your living room. They were wooden and very thick glass, like glass that's more like wall glass, very, very thick, like maybe I could say 18mm kind of glasses. They were really thick. And I remember those were the doors. So you'd find people bringing nature. It was not just about the manicured nature. It could be a forested space. It could be a forested behind the house. It was all into these spaces. Many people have tried to enhance around us, but I think that it's a feel that is more sentimental to those who understand it. If you know, you know. When you find the furniture was easy, honestly. Except the crafting, it was easy. It was either a wooden chair. There wasn't any layers of cushioning much. Those that had cushion, it was also still very thin. And if you have those pieces, even up to now, it's just nice. You can, if you want to upgrade them, you can just kind of upholster them again and bring them to new. I am such a collector. The light was also the basic ball lights. There wasn't something it wasn't so manicured. Things were not so manicured. When you talk about the external, we didn't have so much hardscape in the external, so it was so much greenery, and it was layered plants, like lots of layered plants, like lots and lots of layer, from the succulents to the perennials to the biennials to the flowers. You remember when we would run in flowers and you just find so much, like I call them cottage gardens, and you run through them and they were just in all spaces. It wasn't, and I mean we're 80s babies, but still they were there even in the 80s. The 70s designs carried on. You'd find that there's so many expansive, colorful flowers in people's homes. Like I was fond of literally collecting flowers to plant at ours. I'd always collect these flowers from different places, but they always had lots of flowers. Right now, you if you want to take on flowers, you can do it in like container gardening. You can bring back that field by container gardening and doing all that. But basically, flowers was such a big, not much hardscape. Even when someone had a swimming pool, which most of them were public in this country, but also out there, when they had a pool, it was still, so the water pond just looked like it was just in a nature park. So it didn't overtake, like there were not much terracing, like terracing around the pool and hardscaping. The cabinets, the main thing about the furniture we had, that TV cabinet, they were there in the 70s, and they were hardwood, they were mahogany, they were brown in color, so much more. We had curtains of all shapes and all colors. Curtains were there, like it was layered, just look at that cabin, then you have the curtains. Of course, the nets were also very much there. You would find that if you layered both of those juxtaposition, they would look amazing. Of course, the shelves were decorated with our pieces, either it was the stereo, like the music studio, music system, or it was a TV. If you had those big box like TVs, they were kind of functional, much as they were also kind of decor pieces. Now the chairs had silhouettes. I'll just allow the pictures just do the talking. They had this beautiful shape. You really see that someone thought about this piece before they made it. So much greenery, like I spoke about it. The doors, they had a lot of metals. We still use metals today, but sometimes you feel like it's been covered. You find like if it's silver, it's been covered. Now back then we had real bronze. We had real bronze finishes, like all these metals that seem so expensive. Copper was a thing. We had lots of taps that were copper, real copper people. Bronze was so much there. Brass was a lot, like the brass finishes. So you find there was a lot of metallic accents, especially on the taps, in the bathrooms. All that had like lots of metallic accents. Right now you have a bit of chrome, but chrome is everywhere, and chrome is a mix of things. The house surfaces externally now were majorly brick. Honestly, do you remember there was time when only bricks were the house? Like all the houses were brick. When you think about all the colonial houses, they seem to have bricks. And if they were plastered, they were still like, the plaster was like, it was like the plaster of Paris. Very, very, very muted in color. Like it looked like a bit like muddish, but white in color, or other colors. Yeah, but you also find some houses were even painted. Like brick wall, but it's painted, and the crafting was a lot. You remember that when you even find our institutions right now, lots of crafts are in our institution, but there was a lot of like artistic expression. So people would have crafted pieces around their homes, or you'd have a crafted like a crafted cabinet, like you'd find like a cupboard that has a bit of crafting on it. That was the 70s. People were still using their hands and taking their time. Most of the colors used, the paint colors were mood. I already said that. Even sometimes the brick walls were used internally, but painted. You sometimes go back to these buildings, the old buildings, and you find this, and you're like, how did it happen? But yeah, that's the design of the 70s. Some of us hold on to these pieces. The wooden pieces were also very crafted. They used a lot of layerings. For you find you plywood piles, they're using blockboards, they're using timber pieces of different colors, the light woods, the dark woods were the most common, because I think back then, for me, my thinking is that the wood actually was mature. The timber pieces were cut when the trees were mature, so they were always dark wood, but lots of slating. There was a lot of design on the wood. It wasn't just a plain piece of wood, but was designed, and to always add, you'd find lots of geometry around the house. Like the framing on the windows was wooden, the doors were wooden, the cabins were wooden. So you find that all of them were framed in and sick. It was like like music to your ears, like you're just sliding through a lot of crafted. Right now you can find so much plain. Sometimes I always say when I go in a place and it's too plain for my liking, I like to see a little bit of drama. So the 70s had a lot of drama in the houses, in the bigger properties even around us. Woven chairs, whether they are rattan, whether they were plastic woven, right now we have a lot of plastic woven, but back then it was woven chairs or tables from real materials that come from the environment. So there was a lot of rattan, and it added to the layers. The pottery was major pots. Our pots, You see the pots around my house? This is me trying to relive the period of that time. Yeah. There is a lot I can talk about it. I cannot even like finish it, but you're going to just employ. I just thought I love this design style. I want to talk about it over and over, and I think I'll talk about it more and more. Right now, the silhouettes that I'm showing you and we're showing you in the content is a little bit, you would say, oh my god, that was the fancy side. You know, most of us grew up in the humble side. I am going to also do a video that also capitalizes on the humble side, the way our grandmoms lived, the way, but I also know that we also live this way. It was possibly a mix of a lifestyle. You had a good piece of something and then maybe a humbler piece which was quirky. I would also share the designing like the 70s, but on the lower end, like where the price points were low, but it was basically using the things our grandmothers used, things that were sold in the markets, the things that were made by hand. So just like there's a man who makes these saucepans and like makes them and sells them. There's a man who passes through here and makes the pots. So you'd find you'd always accumulate those things. Could we use them as design? I doubt sometimes if you're not design conscious, you wouldn't know that this is part of our design, period design. But it could be. Actually, right now, for the 70s, I would say, if you're a person like me, you can bring these pieces into your home. Just ransack second-hand places, whether it's furniture, whether it's plates, pans. You'll always find things that talk about the age of old, and you'll always just bring them and layer your home. I have lots of old things, much as they are nice looking and everything, but they speak of the old. And sometimes when you come in my space, it looks layered, but it speaks of the old. I could go on and on, but watch out for our next video, which is basically design like the 70s, but on a lower price point. This will possibly serve us to know that you can actually design even the things you have. You can still design the 70s today if you like the things that are natural to you, the pots, the baskets, the pans that are shaped in cutaway, the things that are made by hand. I'm just going to emphasize it's the things that are made by hand. How do you use them to ensure you can actually speak the design language of your grandma? Do you understand me? Like if my grandma was here, we would speak the same language and we would understand each other. So design like the 70s. Thanks for watching us, and keep it at Carolliving. We are coming back with more content about designing like in the 70s.